I see a lot of guys in the industry and they emanate such a huge amount of confidence and they carry themselves like they're entitled to be there. And I definitely don't feel like I'm entitled to be here. And maybe it's a common thing, but yeah, just always feel like maybe one day you're going to get found out and they'll lift the hood and just discover you in invading the space.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. The loudest voice in the room is not always the best voice for a cause. Finding your voice in the hospitality industry can take years, and being allowed to have that voice is another thing entirely. We talk of the changing nature of hospitality, traditionally a male-dominated sector, but one going through change. What impact has this had on those in the industry that have felt voiceless? Erin Frances Pooley is the owner of Little Frances Wine. Erin, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me, Huck.
It's great to have you here. You've worked in the hospitality sector and now produce wine. Tell us a little bit about what you're up to at the moment, and then we'll go back and have a look at your time in hospitality.
Yeah, so right now I'm in northeastern Victoria. We're in harvest. We have majority of the grapes in, but the rain last week sort of slowed a few things down. So yeah, it's been sort of flat out, that regular harvest work that everybody would be pretty familiar with, where you have really long days and then maybe some nice quiet ones. But yeah, just fermentation management right now. And actually we just pressed out some Pinot this morning before the weekend, so that'll make a nice Easter break for everyone.
You came back to Australia fairly recently. What brought about that move and to do what you're doing?
So yeah, I came back twice last year actually. I came back the first time at the end of February to make wine in Victoria. I'd been planning that for a couple of months. It's something that I'd wanted to expand Little Frances to include Australian wines. And that was sort of my opportunity. So I'd planned it out and got on a plane at the end of February. There was this like virus thing happening, but I didn't really think it was a big deal because I wasn't really paying attention. And then I got here and, the plans in northeastern Victoria didn't work out, just because the bushfires unfortunately sort of took out so many regions on this side of Australia. That was the first time I pivoted in 2020. And actually I went out to the Barossa and Alex Head took me under his wing, thank goodness. And so made a little Shiraz and some Cabernet out there. So I was here during that lockdown. I never left Australia after the shutdown because it just seemed like the safest and most sensible place to wait out a pandemic, being with family and with a somewhat calm political, sort of spectrum and, universal healthcare and all of those kinds of things. So, but then I came back again after what I thought would be harvest in California, but that also harvest didn't work out because of smoke. Two massive fires in Northern California last year and overlaid with a pandemic, that there's the risk of making wine I think was too high for a small producer like me. So much money to put out there and not knowing if the quality is going to, work out. So I came back again at the end of October and I've just been here ever since. So it's been really great to be home, honestly. We're so lucky down here.
You mentioned California and the business actually started over there. Can you tell us how that all came about and why you settled on Northern California?
Yeah. I moved to Northern California in 2010. I just graduated from Charles Sturt. At the time, I was married to an American, so that's sort of the reason that we moved there. We'd been working in South Australia and France and and Northern California as well. So we moved to Healdsburg, and I was working in hospitality to kind of piece things together. They were still recovering from the GFC. There weren't any winery jobs beyond harvest at that time, and so I was working at a couple of different little restaurants there. But in 2012, finally sort of bit the bullet. I've always had this idea of the kinds of wines that I wanted to make. There's table wines. It's always been a part of my life, and over there was a lot of expensive Chardonnays and Pinot Noirs and Zinfandels and these sort of sun-soaked wines. It was the mid-2000s, I guess. So nothing was really affordable or engaging, and nothing for everyday drinking. You'd have to drink imports for that. And so, that was sort of the impetus behind starting to make my own wines, because I just couldn't find the wines in the market there that I wanted to drink. And a couple of friends were making their own wine, had started sort of doing little projects, and it's sort of a light bulb sort of went off, if you maybe you don't need to have this multi-million-dollar building to start making wine. Maybe you don't need to own a vineyard to start making wine. And sort of I saw other guys doing it and sort of wondered if I could do that too. And so started really small with two tons of Semillon, and been growing ever since, sort of.
Well, tell us about those early days, what it was like when you first started. Was there anything that surprised you about trying to make the wines that you wanted to see?
What surprised me? I think, small business is hard. It's definitely more expensive than you think. I think that maybe going in completely naive was the best thing to do, because if you know what you're getting yourself into, you probably hesitate a little bit more. It's such a male-dominated area, though. There were no other women at the time doing what I was trying to do. Barely any, anyway. It's just it's hard, I think, to be what you can't see. And so I think I definitely spent a lot of time reminding myself that I was the same and could do it. I'm like a pint-sized person too, not big and mighty, can haul things around. So I physically you'd look a bit different than the burly plaid shirt wearing man that is so often depicted as a winemaker. So kind of, turning up at vineyards to meet growers, and I think that they definitely do a double take on this, who's this small girl walking through my vineyard. Definitely it's happened a lot, tying down a truck or something like that. They sort of make a reference to whoever's buying the grapes and no, I'm buying these grapes, these are mine, and people look at you funny, and but that's okay. I think that it'll change. It's interesting. I'd like to have more. I'd love to have read more stories and just know more people who had started that path. To feel like you're not alone walking on that road.
You mentioned that it's hard to be what you can't see. Tell us a bit about that and the impact that it's had on how you produce things and what you do.
Yeah. Gosh. I think one is it's a quite you see other people, mostly guys, doing this, and you wonder how people can do all of the things that you need to do, and maybe it's when people have I think that if you have a family, often someone's at home putting dinner on the table for you and taking care of the kids and all that kind of thing, especially in an industry like the wine industry, and the service industry is the same too. The hours are not 9 to 5. They don't fit with with a standard sort of childcare situation and all that sort of stuff. So I think that you wonder how your life, how to sort of plan that all out and how it all fits together and works. I don't know if I really answered the question, but I think that you see, like I see a lot of guys in the industry and they emanate such a huge amount of confidence and they carry themselves like they're entitled to be there. And I definitely don't feel like I'm entitled to be here. And maybe it's a common thing, but just always feel like maybe one day you're going to get found out and they'll lift the hood and just discover you in invading the space. But so it's different experience, I think.
You started in the hospitality sector before moving into wine. Take us back to those early days when you first started in the hospitality sector and what drew you to a career in it.
I've always loved food. Always been engaged in that kind of thing. And the first more serious hospitality job that I had was like a cafe, going through uni to support yourself through uni. But I remember I didn't want to just work in a cafe. I wanted to learn how to be a barista and make sick drinks because I really loved coffee, and I saw basically baristas were my heroes, and I loved that pace, people putting out all these beverages, and so I really loved that. But I think that the takeaway at that time was really taking care of people, because in the mornings people come in and they want to get their latte or the cappuccino or their hot skinny flat white or whatever it is that they want, but you see that customer, that regular, walk through the door, you make eye contact and you nod and you start their beverage and it's ready for them as soon as they've finished paying, and then they're off on the train going to the city or whatever it is, and on their day, on their way, and being able to take care of people and get to know your customers and your regulars. And that was a real, I think, rush, and I loved it, and I think I've carried that through service in all of the different places that I've worked over the years. Just really connecting, I think. That, it's tableside if it's fine dining, but it's just over a little coffee, but it's still just as important to offer that service.
When you were talking about winemaking and the male dominated side of that, hospitality industry is renowned for that as well. But what were the challenges involved for you with your career in hospitality in an industry that historically has been so male driven?
Cafes in Sydney that was actually a female owned cafe I worked in, so that there were no barriers there, which was great. But in California, I don't know if I necessarily had any challenges there with. I actually think in a way that I had an advantage because I'm actually, like I said, I'm quite small, so I don't tower over a table, and I'm not intimidating at all. In that way, so maybe I could get away with a lot more than men in the same space. But you definitely don't carry the authority, I remember even back when I was a teenager working at a pizza place and telling the big macho Italian owner something, some kind of instruction, we needed something, and he just yelled back at me how dare you, woman, talk to me this way, and so I quickly learned to get anything done around there that I needed to tell the footy guy that I was working with, to tell the owner what we needed, and then he would go, yes, I received message, I respect the message, because it had come from this rugby playing 17-year-old instead of this little opinionated girl. So I think that, that was just more like a lesson, but yeah, I hope that part of the world is changing. I don't feel like there was any discrimination though in the restaurant. In the restaurants that I worked at, there were loads of women in the kitchen, especially at Cyrus when I was there. Probably 50-50 while I was there. Maybe less so at the restaurant at Meadowood. But I don't think that was, I think that was just based on applications more than anything.
You fell in love with service and that art of hospitality. Tell us about the time when you started to think about producing your own wines and how you came to that decision.
Just wanting to, I've always had in mind what I wanted to make, and I think maybe the traditional way to go through the industry is to get a job in a winery, like entry level, and then work your way up through the ranks, and then maybe one day break out on your own. I think that's sort of what you see that a lot. But it was so hard for me to get in entry level when I graduated, so I just didn't go that route. I was like, well, all I need is some cash to get started. So that's all of my fine dining paychecks went into buying grapes and glass and labels and all of the things that, you warehousing, all that stuff, all the fun stuff. I knew what I wanted to do, so I didn't want to work for 20 years for somebody else making their wine their way before I would have permission to do it myself. So I think I'm maybe an impatient and quite determined person. So I just decided it, and now I'm doing it. Still kind of pinch yourself every day that it's actually happening, though, I think. Yeah.
Taking it on yourself and being determined like that to do it yourself. Has there been any sort of hurdles or mistakes that along the way?
So many. The whole thing is a hurdle and a mistake, probably. No, it's a wild ride. I think there's so many amazing ups and there's so many downs. Yeah, one day you're like paying all your bills, and the next day you're wondering how you're going to pay your bills. But I was so lucky in California to have a really supportive Custom Crush group of friends who helped. Not only was it just like an honor to make wine in their winery every year and be with them, but they would always help when I needed things filtered or racked or topped or sulfured, or when I was in Australia, bottled, all of these things. So it had an amazing community. So I think when you're doing it alone, like I have been doing it, you really have to build up a big community, and it's so hard to, I think, accept help. It's so hard to reach out and ask for help as well. I'm very grateful there's been so many people around me that have been encouraging over time and still are today. And that's in the Californian wine industry and also Australia and kind of global actually now, because, going to Charles Sturt, you study with people all over the world. So kind of you have a big global network. But it's really nice. I think it's a team sport, right? So the service industry, you can't run a restaurant alone, and definitely the wine industry is really connected and really supportive of each other. So
you set out on this path to make the sort of wines that you wanted to see and enjoy. Can you tell us about some of the wines that you make and how they stand out?
My first love is Semillon. And I guess that sort of maybe answers your question from earlier. Like, I was in California and saw this Semillon available, and there was no one in California, well, I didn't know at the time there was one other producer, but making Semillon in like a hunter style, in that really nice early pick, retain the acidity, ferment it, bottle it young, and then let it age. I didn't understand why Californians weren't doing that, because to me, I'm from Sydney, and Semillon kind of flows like water over there, I guess, and it's just like the best thing in the world. Especially when it's old. So I really wanted to see, that was I'm curious, right? Like, does the Semillon taste the way that it does out of the hunter because of the hunter, or is it the grape variety? Like, can I make that sort of style of wine from these grapes in Lake County, California? And it turns out that, they're similar. It's not the same, of course, but the wine comes in, it like ferments to less than 11% alcohol, and it's dry, and we bottle it really young, and then after a couple of years in bottle, it blooms, like it blossoms into this like textured, savory, like lanolin, lemon curd. It's just like a weighty wine, but it has no like alcohol power behind it. So it has so much flavor and complexity, and tastes good ice cold and tastes good as it warms up, and it works with raw vegetables, and it works with a roast chicken and everything in between, like it's just a really flexible wine, and something that I can't imagine ever getting tired of drinking those kinds of beautiful, dry, savory, complex white wines. So I started with Semillon in 2012 and have made that all the way through. But I age it before release. So like in Australia, my current release is the 2015. And in the States, they've just started on the 2016s. It's not a good business model for anybody who's listening and thinking about going into the aged Semillon business. Like, you have to wait a long time before you get a return. But so to complement that, I started staying in the same vein of like a textured white wine. California is so amazing with Chenin Blanc from sort of just near Sacramento, the Delta area. Though it's sort of it's been around for decades and decades, going into big box plonk sort of quantity over quality wines, but it's really changing. There's a new generation of younger viticulturalists and vineyard owners that are bringing the quality over the quantity. And I've been working with Chenin Blanc for a couple of years now, and I always barrel ferment that, and it brings out a sort of nice like almond, peach, and like beautiful texture. Because I try minimal intervention, all of the buzzwords that are out there now, but like the Chenin Blanc ferments in neutral oak, so old French barrels, and so there's no temperature control, so it just sort of naturally stirs itself and ferments, and then settles, and then we bottle it, and it's just delicious, very Moorish. So, and with that, I also been playing with Merlot as well. So, been sort of captured my attention with that sort of blue and purple sort of. It has a real joyful fruit profile on the vine, and so I really like. We've been trying to bottle that energy, that brightness, that plush fruit, without it being insipid and like simple. So that I've been working with a couple of different sites, and actually have some King Valley Merlot that's just been pressed off here. It's in tank, ready to go to barrel, and I'm excited about that as well. Yeah, it's lots of curiosity and experimentation, and just seeing what kind of flavors you can capture to bring to everybody's dinner tables.
You started in California, and now you're in Victoria. Is it Is there differences between the grapes and the processes that you go through with those two regions?
Yeah. I mean, for one thing, there's no labour force here in Australia. There's no immigrant labour force. So everything is hand harvested in California because there's just like massive amounts of people who can pick an entire vineyard in a couple of hours, and it's really, really remarkable how hard everybody works. And that just doesn't exist in Australia. I think one thing that's been a big change actually in Victoria especially is there's a lot of birds, which is so lovely because I've been enjoying watching the birds. Where I'm at, there's all these gang cockatoos that I'd never seen them in the wild before, and they're just amazing. But so there's like a lot of bird damage, and so netting is really important in Australia, where I've never seen a single vineyard, I think, netted in California. But I don't know, it's like so much labour, so there's just a lot of meticulous farming. And I was in Napa and Sonoma, so it's a pretty like fancy, expensive wine regions. But yeah, there's like not a leaf blade out of place over there. It's like one cluster per shoot, and not like a high ROI, I think, on the grapes in terms of like tonnage. But in Australia, I think that it's a bit, because there's less labour, more mechanisation, there's a little bit more, the vineyards are a little bit more relaxed. We've got a little less water. But I think that just really comes down to approach and labour. But otherwise, fermentation's kind of the same.
You've got friends back in the US, and you mentioned earlier that you're very happy to be here in Australia, given what's going on sort of globally still. Have you spoken to anyone back there? Or what's your feelings about what's happening back in the States compared to sort of where Australia is at in regards to the pandemic?
Yeah, so I'm so excited and heartened by a lot of my friends in the agricultural areas all have been vaccinated now. So yeah, that rollout, the vaccination rollout, is much faster, and the approach has been much different than here. Whereas we're going with these age brackets and maybe like exposure risk with frontline workers. Anybody in the ag industry was able to get their jabs like, I don't know, I think they started in about February. So that's all really good to see. But other than that, like, I think that the restaurants and social distancing stuff is all really county by county and state by state. It's so different. I know that dining has started opening up in some areas like San Francisco. I've got a friend working the floor in San Francisco who said they're at 25% capacity. But so the masks are still part of every single day for Americans that are, I don't know, it's very political in the US. So I don't think that Australia has the same kind of political division in terms of how to be safe around other people. But yeah, so I'm just so glad to see everybody getting vaccinated, and can't wait for everybody here to get their jabs too.
Given you started in California and you came back to Australia to explore some opportunities, but then ended up having to stay here, what's your plans? Do you see yourself staying here to produce wine ongoing, or do you have plans to go back?
Yeah, no, I definitely plan on making wine here ongoing. I'd like to make wine in California again too, but I don't think that that's on the cards for 2021. So just trying to be patient and let all of the last 18 months kind of dust settle. It's been pretty disruptive and difficult to make plans, but no, I'm enamored with the Victorian, like wine scene. There's so much to explore here. I've got so many questions and none of them are answered, and so I hope that just there's so many things that I want to ferment and experiment with. But I just got here like 5 minutes ago, so I don't know a lot of people, and I don't have my foot in the door like that yet. So it'll be slow to get started, but that's all right. I think it's so interesting. Victoria is such a diverse little state. I think maybe the palette for wine here could be endless. So,
You mentioned you've got so many questions that are unanswered. What are some of the things that you're exploring or want to sink your teeth into?
So many things that I can't act on this year because grapes take a long time to establish. But one of the things, just like looking at what varieties are available here, and that's one big difference actually between California and Australia, is that we have a big quarantine situation, and everything has to be on rootstock. And then there's the overlay of phylloxera in Victoria being pretty patchy and making logistical movements a little bit more challenging. But just seeing what grapes are here, what's doing well, what's already established, and maybe could we ferment differently, just to, like, I'm interested in northeastern Italian varieties. I think that's where my mum's family's from originally, and I worked a lot with some really close colleagues in the States who are working with a lot of Pinot Grigio, Friulano, Ribolla Gialla, all of these things. I'm curious to see how those flavours are expressed up here too. Plus, I'm still stuck on Merlot and maybe some Semillon in the future. And just getting back to like a co-fermented vineyard sort of, I guess down here, maybe like you think about it as like a fruit salad pick, that whole, growing varieties side by side and harvesting them together, fermenting them together so they're unified from the beginning, and just creating a wine that has more natural sort of balance from that point, instead of getting a whole pile of different little lots in a lab and blending them together to the percentages. I really love the practice of harvesting a whole vineyard and making it's a field blend, and getting that harmony from the very beginning.
You made the move from the US to here, and you're happy to be here. But what sort of impact has the last year had on you? Has it changed you and what you do? It's changed. Yeah, definitely. It's been a bumpy one. I think I was heading for a lot of change before the year really got under road. But like, what I've loved the most about this whole sort of shutdown period is how you just slow down a little bit, and definitely more cooking at home, more time with family, and which for me, living overseas for so long, I had a lot of family time that I needed to catch up on, I think, and friends too. And just, I think that because you don't see your friends and family that often now, when you do see them, it's like dining out at a restaurant. When you do go out to a restaurant, it's really special, and I think you don't take as much stuff for granted, and just slowing it down, not working like 80 hours a week, burning the candle at all of the ends, just to pay rent and insurance and all of the like boring stuff, because that at the end doesn't matter at all. The people in your life are what matters the most. So I think that's what's changed, and just I've like this last 12 months pulled the ripcord on my salary safety net. So that's been the biggest change, is that I'm all in on little Frances now, and
it feels really different to be dedicated to my own business instead of splitting your energy between someone else's business and then doing yours on the weekend or the evenings and around the edges. So I think that's the biggest change, those two biggest changes.
Well, Erin, it's been fascinating to hear your story and look forward to seeing your wines featured across the country. We've loved having you on Deep in the Weeds, and please keep in touch, and we'll talk again soon. Thanks
so much, and thanks so much for just telling all these small stories that you're telling from everybody's lives. It's really so great. So I appreciate the time and energy you're spending doing this.
Thanks, Erin. We'll talk again soon. This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we share the stories of Australia's hospo community, suppliers and producers in search of hope during this pandemic. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.